Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone today on this Thursday. I'd like to call our meeting of the Southern Nevada Strategic Infrastructure Development Working Group to order. It's about 10 o'clock on the dot. And Jeanette would like to establish quorum.
Yes, absolutely. For the record, this is Jeanette Holguin, and I'll now call the roll. Chris Sanchez.
Here.
Dave Johnson.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. Doa Ross. Jeff Brigger. Justin Brown.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Terry Sheridan.
Here.
Thank you, Terry. Ryan Smith. Rafi Festikajan.
Morning. Hi.
Good morning. Maisha Williams. Present. Shawnee Coleman.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Jonas Peterson.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Thank you. James Chrisley.
Present.
Bo Bernhard.
Here.
Victor Wade.
Here.
Derek Hill.
Good morning. Here.
MJ Maynard.
Here.
David Swallow.
I'm here.
Chancellor Melody Rose.
Good morning. Present.
Good morning. David Bobzian.
Here.
Jennifer Taylor.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Dr. Federico Zaragoza.
Present, and good morning.
Good morning. Christina Swallow. Okay. Sandra Rosenberg.
Here.
Bradley Crowell.
Morning. Here.
Jim Lawrence.
Good morning. Here.
Sean Sever.
Good morning. Here.
Constance Brooks. Okay. Dr. Kumad Acharya.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Bart Patterson.
Present.
Okay. All right, I will mark, I do have Dave Johnson and Doa Ross to join us shortly. So I will mark Jeff Brigger, Brian Smith, Christina Swallow, and Constance Brooks as absent. Chris, we have quorum.
Thank you, Jeanette. Appreciate that. Moving on to item number 2, public comment. If anybody from the public wishes to offer a comment, please state your first and last name clearly, and we will have about 2 minutes for each individual comment. Jeanette, would you like to coordinate?
Yes, again, this is Jeanette Hogan for the record. Does anyone wish to give any public comment at this time? Like Chris mentioned, you will have 2 minutes per person. Okay, and we did not receive any previously written in public comments, so no public comment at this time, Chris.
Thank you, Jeanette. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the February 25th minutes. Were there any changes to the minutes as written? All right. Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes for the February 25th working group meeting?
I'll make a motion. So moved.
Yeah, a couple of folks speak up at the same time. Do we want to try that again? I couldn't catch who it was.
I think Jennifer Taylor gave a second. Chris?
Oh, okay. And who offered the motion for the record?
Aisha Williams.
Thank you. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, great. Thank you. The minutes have been approved. Moving on to item number 4, chairman comments. Again, I want to thank everybody for their time. I know that all of us have busy schedules, and I know that the pressures that we're all under with legislative session and everything going on at this time. But I appreciate all of the perspective and value that you offer as we work through this working group process and understanding more about the. I'd like to ask also if folks can mute their microphones, please. There's a little bit of background noise here. But you know, taking time to think about strategy and the Southern Nevada region and the context of the post-COVID environment is immensely important at this juncture. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background on the topics of discussion today before we move on in the agenda. One of the things that we're all aware of, I think, is that the Southern Nevada Economic Development and Conservation Act has been dropped in the U.S. Senate by Senator Cortez Masto. And today we will hear from staff from the Senator's office on an update regarding the lands bill. So we're looking forward to that. And you'll notice that your topic today for discussion is the inland port and intermodal facilities. And interestingly, this is a concept that's been around in Southern Nevada now for well over a decade. And in fact, in 2011, the legislature had approved a request for a study to be conducted to look at the economic impact that an inland port or an intermodal facility would have on the Southern Nevada region. And subsequently, a report was released soon after that in 2012 that RCG Economics had put together that went through it at that time and kind of looked at freight flows across the region and the macro region, and then subsequently more in the California and Southwest context, and made recommendations around and conclusions about an inland port intermodal facility. And we thought it would be timely to think about that in the modern context post-COVID, understanding that supply chains have changed significantly as a result of COVID. And the rise of e-commerce, which was accelerating pretty rapidly before COVID, has made significant increases over the last 12 months. And in many cases, a lot of organizations, The Economist and McKinsey and others have said that we have experienced about 10 years of growth in e-commerce in the matter of a year. So with that being said, there's kind of a new methodologies that need to be adopted, a new approach, and certainly kind of a new lens of understanding our role in the conveyance of freight and how an intermodal or inland port facilities could be a benefit to this region. Also, it's important to note that there's challenges that are experienced by our sister states, if you will, understanding the pressure points at the Port of LA and the Port of Oakland, understanding how Nevada and this region specifically adds value to private industry and to those facilities, and also understanding that Utah has invested in building out a facility of their own over the last 5 years. And so the intent in this meeting, I think, is to explore those new factors and to gain an appreciation and understanding from our panel on their experience, as they have specific experience over the last several decades in working with inland port facilities and standing up inland port facilities within their jurisdictions. So I'm very excited about today's discussion, and would like to encourage everybody on the working group to please don't hesitate to ask questions and engage. And if you think of things after the meeting, as I often do, please don't hesitate to jot down some notes that we can perhaps revisit in subsequent meetings as we work through this. I think it's important to note also that, as you know, John Restrepo and his team at RCG Economics, as well as the GoEd team, are providing technical support. One of the things that they are doing is chronicling the, let's say, key takeaways for each meeting. And so during our next meeting, we will have an update on the key takeaways that have been teased out of the discussions. And we'll have an opportunity for the working group to to look at those in a little bit more detail and offer some additional comment. And also would like to encourage everybody to think about, as we've circulated potential, or as I should say, as we think about what the topics will be for the next meetings and approaching those meetings and making sure that we get information out and inviting speakers. If you have any ideas, please reach out to myself or Jeanette and the team, John Restrepo's team at RCG Economics. We'd like to hear from you and get your input. So moving on from that, I'd like to move to item number 5, which is the comment from our Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Economic Development in Nevada, Michael Brown. Michael, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today. This group came about, the governor convened a group leadership meeting with Southern Nevada officials about 90 days ago as we were moving from the relief phase of the pandemic to the recovery phase. We had also just gotten our research back from Stanford SRI International on the state of Nevada and our options going forward. And in the chat box during that meeting on economic recovery, I was chatting with Chair Kirkpatrick, and I said, you know, we have gotten some signals that we might not have the infrastructure we need to actually grow and develop the economy as we need to. I want to remind folks that we saw warning signs in the hot Nevada economy of 2019. Our gaming industry was still a mature industry with limited upside growth. And I'll remind folks that MGM did a large layoff of middle management weeks before the pandemic was even rumored of. So we could see some transformation occurring there, and we could see some gaps in healthcare and things of that nature. And so Chair Kirkpatrick and I had this chat back and forth, and we said, well, why don't we ask Chris Sanchez to assemble a group of Southern Nevada experts in this area to really understand what our competitive position is in this. And I was troubled because we use a measure called the Hochman Index, which maybe many of you are more familiar with than even I am, but it measures the diversification of states and counties. And when we got the numbers, we discovered that on a scale of 100, Nevada ranked 69 or 67. Utah ranked 98, Arizona ranked 96, and these are our most competitive states. As we look for opportunities to diversify the economy, we find that companies are interested in a Pacific time zone, or at least as far west as they can get. They would like not to be in California, and so we find ourselves going head to head with Arizona and Utah, both with this high diversification rate. We then had it broken down by county, and that was a startling number. We discovered that that Washoe County scored 84%. That is an excellent score. That puts it above many of the states of the United States. Clark County came in at 45%. The economic engine of the state was as diversified as a West Virginia or a natural resource state, which really kind of almost classified it as kind of a classic company town suffering from resource curse, which drives out other investment. And so when we started then to look at recovery in the gaming industry, as Chris said, everything's been accelerated by 10 years, and it is not hard for us to project that there will be many folks that worked in gaming before that are not going to have that opportunity. Again, so we looked, Sanford had recommended, or SRI had recommended, again, technology, light manufacturing, energy, renewable energy, and health as the 4 areas to really focus on. But to compete in that area for light manufacturing and technology, we're competing against Utah and Arizona head to head. We then picked up a piece from McKinsey, and I think it's one of the most thoughtful pieces that I have read. And it said that 21 would be the year of transition as corporations that found themselves entangled with just-in-time inventory started to sort themselves out, and that between the period of 22 to 24, American manufacturing, with assistance from the incoming administration, would seek to onshore many of their operations to North America. And I say North America, not necessarily the United States, because Canada and Mexico will be competing for this same investment. And that they expected over 4 years for there to be billions of dollars worth of new investment coming back to the United States as companies attempt to sort out their supply lines. And now all that's great theory, and I've talked all about the research and the theory. And then after inaugural day, we started getting the calls. We've gotten calls from very serious manufacturers that have found themselves upside down now and trying to sort out the logistics and supply chains and e-commerce delivery chains. And they're very interested in Nevada as a Pacific time zone state. And when they've come to talk to us, they want to talk about infrastructure. They want to talk about the line of sight to the Long Beach ports. They want to talk about rail service. They want to talk about trucking. They want to talk about industrial parks. They want to talk about what had really been displaced because much of the discussion in economic development in 18 and 19 was about incentives and abatements. These companies are trying to figure out how they're going to survive in an era of superpower challenges, superpower rivalries, where they need to bring their manufacturing and their operations back to the United States. So really what Chris is working on with your able assistance is trying to really understand what our strengths are in Southern Nevada, what our weaknesses are, how we can address those weaknesses so that we can actually be a competitor for the billions of dollars of investment that's on the table now to kind of create the jobs that we're going to need to diversify that Southern Nevada economy. And I appreciate the time and effort that all of you are putting into this. I had to testify at the legislature at the first meeting, so I wasn't able to be there to kind of present this broad picture. We also need to do that understanding that we're in the desert and that we have water constraints and that we have a governor that is committed to implementing climate change policies. And so we actually have to do this not looking back into 20th century manufacturing, but looking forward into how does 21st century manufacturing and logistics and technology and supply chain fit into Nevada. Some things may not fit. There's been one company where I've had to say, I just don't think Nevada's your home. There are 3 others right now that I would really like to make Nevada their home, and we're working closely with them. So I appreciate the commitment of time in this accelerated world we live in right now to this effort, and I'm going to stick with this morning, and thank you so much for participating. And I'd be glad to answer any questions or take them in the chat room.
Any questions for Director Brown? Great, thank you, Director. Moving on to our item number 6, and that is a update on the Southern Nevada Economic Development and Conservation Act. Kyle Chapman from Senator Cortez Masto's office.
Everybody, thank you for inviting me to join you all today. My name is Kyle Chapman. I'm a senior policy advisor for Senator Cortez Masto. I work on her public lands and natural resources portfolio in support of her role as the new chairman of the Public Lands, Forestry, and Mining Subcommittee for the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. As you all know, the Senator recently introduced the Southern Nevada Economic Development and Conservation Act, also known as the Clark County Lands Bill, on March 3rd. It was a long effort in the making. You are all well aware this effort has been in the works for several years. First at the county level, where they developed the proposal with wide stakeholder engagement, which was ultimately submitted to the congressional delegation back in 2019. The Senator then released her discussion draft in January 2020, where we then received a wide degree of feedback and spent the next several months doing our own due diligence and stakeholder engagement on that front. We had planned to finish our own process months ago, but the onset of the pandemic and subsequent response efforts prolonged our efforts on that. But now that the bill has been introduced, we will move into our next phase of continuing our efforts of building support for the bill and engaging the Senator's colleagues to work it through the legislative process. Just to give you a little bit of a bill overview, you may have seen some of the summary materials that we recently distributed, but I'll just give you a short overview of it. First, I'd like to thank GoEd and several other folks that are on this call for their support and endorsement of this effort thus far. The support we've received has been invaluable and much appreciated by the senator personally. The bill appreciates the support of the entire congressional delegation, the Clark County Commission, City of Henderson, Boulder City, Mapa Band of Paiutes, many local conservation organizations, including Save Red Rock and the Nevada Conservation League and others, the Nevada Housing Coalition, Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, SNWA. It also has the support from Las Vegas, Henderson, Urban, and Latin Chambers of Commerce, and several other organizations. So broadly, this bill contains 3 pillars. Number 1, it contains a very robust commitment to conservation, providing permanent conservation designations to over 2 million acres in Southern Nevada, including 41,000 acres to be held in trust for the Mapa Band of Paiutes, 51,000 acre expansion for Red Rock, 350,000 acres specifically set aside for desert species habitat conservation that's made at the request of the county, 120,000 acres of new OHV recreation area, and almost 340,000 acres of new wilderness in Clark County, plus 1.3 million acres of wilderness designated specifically within the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. So number 2, the bill also includes new provisions to allow for greater affordable housing opportunities in the county. And number 3, the bill also expands the existing SNPLMA boundary to provide new land over the long term to facilitate future population growth and economic diversification needs. So I'll touch upon that in greater detail in just a little bit, but before I do, I just wanted to say a few words on the need and importance of this legislation that the senator asked me to share with all of you. So as Southern Nevada rebuilds its post-pandemic economy and anticipates adding another 820,000 residents approximately by 2060, it does so in the midst of threats from climate change. And to ensure Southern Nevada's future is healthy and livable and climate resilient, you all know that the county had launched their initiatives to develop a community-wide sustainability and climate action plans. And at the base of their initiatives for both of those projects is an expansion of the SNPLMA disposal boundary, the boundary created by the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act of '98 that allows the federal government to jointly release federal land in conjunction with the county and the Las Vegas Valley for residential and commercial interests, with the majority of those disposal revenues being returned back to the state and into the county for conservation and enhancement of the natural environment. And so, as we all know, Southern Nevada is very unique to other states and localities, and that its urban core is encircled by federal land that imposes restrictions to, sustainable growth and development, and local conservation efforts and other planning efforts to promote economic diversification. And federal legislative action is necessary to achieve those goals, and to help provide for complementary wildlife habitat conservation and climate mitigation efforts. So going back to the SNPLMA piece, as many of you know, the SNPLMA boundary encompasses just over 70,000 acres today. And it's estimated that over 27,000 acres are left to accommodate a few more years of regular growth. Many people hear that figure and assume that every acre of land would be utilized for development, which you all know is not practicable for a variety of reasons. And so in looking at smaller land availability for future needs, the county had proposed an expansion of the SNPLMA boundary, which is incorporated into the senator's legislation. And ultimately, the senator's legislation changes SNPLMA in 3 ways. Number one, the biggest change is that the current SNPLMA boundary is expanded to, by another 42,000 acres. The overwhelming bulk of that expansion is on the south end of the valley, along and east of I-15 toward Jean. And as you all know, expanding the disposal boundary provides for orderly and predictable growth through the joint nomination process, with those proceeds continuing to be deposited in the SNPLMA special account, allowing the revenues to come back into Southern Nevada instead of going into the federal government's general treasury. Number two, that the senator's legislation makes changes to SNPLMA, is that the legislation takes the already existing 12 disposal areas elsewhere in the county and includes them within the SNPLMA joint nomination and disposal process. These outerlying areas were previously designated by the BLM in their earlier land management plans as potential disposal areas. And so, however, these areas, which account for about 54,000 acres, are currently administered separate from the SNPLMA program. They are subject to the Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976, also called FLPMA, essentially meaning that they are not subject to the joint BLM county disposal nomination process, and those revenues from their sales do not come back to the state or the county. So the change that the senator's bill would do would mean that those revenues would go come back into the state if those areas were ever to be utilized for disposal. And so functionally, that provision consolidates two different land management programs into one, which is better suited for Southern Nevada's land management purposes, which is better suited particularly for a state with over 85% of the land managed by the federal government. And so the bill makes some modifications to some of those boundaries of the outerlying disposal areas to take into account existing infrastructure or some sensitive species habitat, resulting in a small reduction of that acreage in some places. Overall, with the larger expansion of the SNPLMA boundary and the Las Vegas Valley, and those modifications to the outer areas, the bill would provide a net total of over 30,000 acres for future potential residential or commercial development in the county. The third element that changes SNPLMA is to create a new funding category to support the changing environmental needs in the region and to help further preserve existing conservation advancements. Specifically, this new category would support local priorities to improve regional sustainability, increase environmental resiliency, and support projects that help mitigate against future population growth. So this category would complement, or is intended to complement, Clark County's sustainability efforts with the master planning and environmental mitigation initiatives. And so, as many of you know, under the SNPLMA revenue distribution system, 85% of revenues is eligible towards regional conservation purposes to be nominated by and implemented by local, state, and federal agencies. So broadly, this new category, or I should back up and just mention that the existing federal categories include, creation of local parks, trails, natural areas, acquisition of environmentally sensitive land for habitat conservation, capital improvements to federal land, including the state's national parks and the Desert Refuge. And so this new funding category that the senator is proposing continues to fall under that SNPLMA conservation spirit. All the eligible entities that could utilize this new category would be similar to eligible entities of the existing funding categories. So local municipalities and agencies like the county, cities, or other local agencies. And the senator envisions this new funding category to be used to deploy different sustainable community and environmental mitigation projects that will complement the local initiatives. Examples could include deployment of EV charging infrastructure, building energy retrofit projects, conversion of transit and bus fleets, ornamental turf conversions, infill incentives, urban heat island mitigation projects. This, just a few that we would expect that could be used for. And so, now that the bill has been introduced, we're starting to receive a trickle of requests to consider changes or modifications, and we expect that this will pick up as more people review and become familiar with the text. In the meantime, the senator will be working with her colleagues on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee to make them more acquainted with the subject matter. And the hard part is that many of those members don't understand the unique nature of a state like Nevada that has so much of its land taken up by federal ownership. And, many of Nevada's needs are foreign to them. And so it takes a lot of effort sometimes to educate some of them, especially whenever we're asking them to vote in favor of a bill that is such of a local nature. So over the next few months, we're hoping to have a legislative hearing, then a markup on the bill to incorporate any necessary or relevant amendments. We will have to do the same on the House side too, and we'll then be working to identify a larger legislative vehicle, perhaps a broader public lands package or otherwise, where this bill could be included. And so we'll be diligently working on this, but I expect that this will still be an effort with many months left in the making. And so with that, we welcome your support and your continued engagement. I'll forewarn the group that this will likely be an all hands on deck effort as this process moves forward. And we may call upon you at different times for your support and outreach to maybe some of our colleagues in the future. So with that, I thank you for your attention and your interest. Happy to take some questions that you may have. If I can't answer any, I'm happy to take them back and get back to you at a later time.
Thank you, Kyle. Do we have any questions from the working group members?
Hi, this is Jim Lawrence with Nevada Conservation Natural Resources. I do have a question for Kyle, if I may.
Sure.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciated the overview, and I've been kind of studying up on the bill myself. I love the sustainability component, adding to the SNPLMA categories. I think that's needed. Question, though, I have is, my experience with SNPLMA and the different funding categories is the state of Nevada and public agencies, it's kind of hit and miss whether the state is eligible in the various land bills. My personal opinion is that, regarding the original SNPLMA legislation, that it's been unfortunate that our Nevada state parks aren't eligible for funding where local parks are and federal facilities are. And I'm wondering, when we talk about sustainability, given the state government footprint down in Clark County, is the state of Nevada eligible to participate in that funding category for climate work and sustainability work?
So the language is currently written does not list out eligible specific entities, but we are intending for this new category to have similar eligibility for the existing funding categories. And we're trying to write it in a way where it is complementary and conducive to the state and the county and local municipalities' sustainability goals and climate change efforts. And so, I think that as we continue to vet the legislation and receive some technical assistance from the agencies and some other community council and other folks, we're happy to provide some greater specificity, and we're also happy to take in some further feedback on that effort. If it's, as everybody takes a closer look at it and has some suggested changes, and we're happy to do that.
Great, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that, and sort of help study up on it a little bit more. But I just want to make sure that there's not any opportunities lost, basically.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And the hard part is always bringing other folks, others of the senators' colleagues around to some of these ideas, because like I mentioned, Nevada is so unique, and in many ways the Snippleman model is a unique element that other states in the country don't have. And so some of our inherent hurdles that we will have to face is making the case to many of these members, making them aware of what SNPLMA is, why it exists, probably answering questions of why they don't have something like that, and then making the case for why we should kind of expand those categories to encompass something new. So I'm sure that we'll have much further conversations on that front.
Kyle, this is Brad, also from DCNR. Have you had any preliminary discussions or thinking about how, if the lands bill is enacted, how it may match up or overlay with a 30 by 30 initiative from the Biden administration, either via statute or executive order?
Yeah, so we have given that a little bit of thought, and the hard part with the 30 by 30 initiative right now is that it's still kind of vague. It's in a conceptual phase, and so our questions have always been, what encompasses 30 by 30? What will count towards those efforts? And we feel in the senator's office that the Clark County Lands Bill, plus some of the other legislation that she has previously promoted, like her Ruby Mountains Protection Act, which prohibits oil and gas leasing in the Ruby Mountains, some of her other lands bills for other counties in the state, the In-Speculative Oil and Gas Leasing Act, which she has recently introduced, which prohibits oil and gas leasing on federal lands with low or no potential. And we feel that what we are doing in the state charts a good roadmap towards what fits for Nevada to meet those goals. But I think that it's kind of all up to us to broadcast that roadmap to the folks in the administration and advocates for the initiative that are trying to put those definitions to the initiative. And so, like I said, we feel like this is a pretty good roadmap, especially with so much conservation, encompassed within one county in the United States, that is pretty fitting to kind of help meet the definition of that initiative.
Thanks, and that makes sense. And I know it's outside of Clark County, but for what it's worth, we're hoping that the sagebrush mitigation projects can qualify under a 30-30 as well.
Yeah, and at this point, it's kind of, we are all in the process together of making those definitions. And so if, what we feel should be met under that initiative, then I think that we can be advocating for that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that. And I think what we'll do is just have to ask you to come back on here at another meeting to entertain more questions, but I'm mindful of our time. So I appreciate the detail there and the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to item number 7, and that is our panel discussions. I'm really excited about, and first want to thank our speakers today. One of the things that we sought to do was bring folks together that had combined decades of experience in an understanding of inland ports and intermodal facilities and freight conveyance in general. And what I think I'll do is begin with just a few lines about each of our speakers. We'll start with Chris Gutierrez. We'll move on to Michael Sussman, and then subsequently Pierce Homer. What I'd like each of the panelists to do is a brief introduction, and then certainly move into your remarks after all three have had a chance to introduce themselves and give their initial remarks. We'll then open it up for questions from the working group members. So I'll provide a little bit of background here and perspective for all three, and then move into Chris. So Chris Gutierrez is the president of the Kansas City Smart Port. The port has been referred to as the second most important rail transport hub in North America. One of the things that I found interesting in our research is that in the late 1990s, the Kansas City Smart Port was born out of the region's desire to coordinate development strategies and organize transportation and logistical activities, much like we're trying to do today. So if you go back to the mid to late 90s, the effort that was commenced and took underway to fundamentally kind of shift that region is there's a lot of parallels with where we find Southern Nevada. Michael Sussman is the Michael Sussman is the CEO of Strategic Rail Finance, author of the 2021 Nevada State Rail Plan. Michael and his team have been involved in the last almost 2 years now in Nevada working on the rail plan. And one of the things that I think is of note is that the intention that Michael and his team approached the plan was to have a kind of best-in-class and first-of-its-kind rail plan in terms of the methodologies presented, in terms of the approach, and the idea that it was not a plan to be developed to sit on a shelf, but a plan that was designed to be implemented. And so I know Michael will talk a bit more about that. But he and his team bring a tremendous amount of knowledge and nationally of what's going on around freight and more importantly, I think our role in Nevada in the matrix of freight and offsetting some of the challenges that we have identified in California at the ports. Our third, it will be Pierce Homer, an international expert in transportation and port facilities. Pierce served as Virginia's Secretary of Transportation under Governors Kane and Warner, and he's currently the Director and Senior Vice President of Transportation at Moffitt and Nichol, a global infrastructure advisory firm focusing on transportation, energy, environmental, marine terminal, and urban development. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to turn the floor over to Chris Gutierrez. Thank you and welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite to be here. And Jeanette, thank you for keeping me organized and making it to the call today. So appreciate all of you having this focus. As Chris said, in the mid 90s, we undertook a study that back then, I don't know if the senator's staff is still on, we got an earmark when you were allowed to do that from the Treasury Department when Customs was part of that. And we undertook a study called the Mid-Continent Tradeway Study. So it was very focused on international trade then, but the study, like the study that Michael probably did on rail, really looked at the infrastructure benefits of Kansas City and how do we grow and respond to the changes in that sector. And there was things like expanding our rail or our highway bridge over the Missouri River, expanding foreign trade zones, and then ultimately the creation of Kansas City Smart Port. So in 2000, we were incorporated as an entity to focus on the growing transportation logistics sector. I'd been with the group for about 18 years, was actually with the GOED group for the state of Missouri as it was being formed, so I was involved in the beginning. But today, we are very focused on 18 counties, both sides of the state, Missouri and Kansas. And after the first couple of years of looking at this sector, we became very focused on economic development. And the creation of the group was started with our Greater Kansas City Chamber, our MPO, the Council of Governments in our region, and our Economic Development Group, KCADC, and then very, very focused on economic development. Our job is to bring freight-based economic development, so manufacturing, distribution, warehousing, logistics operations to the greater Kansas City region as a pure economic development group. We are the attraction group, so we don't control the incentives, we don't control the sites, we don't control the land, and work with both states and our 18 counties and 50 communities. Since the beginning, the focus was on promoting and pushing the infrastructure benefits our region. And Chris, I'll challenge your comment. We're actually the #1 rail center in the country by tonnage. Second in terms of the number of rail cars that move through our region. Chicago's #1 with the amount of rail cars, but in terms of tonnage, because we move a lot of coal and ag commodities through this region. So we have 5 of the Class 1 railroads that serve our region. We're of significant highway infrastructure, move more freight through our airport than any other airport in the 6-state region except for Chicago. And then we have the Missouri River. So we have all 4 modes of freight and transportation in Kansas City, which is a benefit to us. And of recent trends, I think Michael highlighted e-commerce. We say that e-commerce grew 5 years and about 3 months through the pandemic. That changed the UPS, FedEx, Postal Service, all the carriers that do last miles business model. We saw that growth here. You can reach about 85% of the U.S. population from Kansas City on the ground. So we saw a significant growth in e-commerce facilities. Amazon being the biggest, I think they invested more than $70 billion last year in new facilities. We saw 4 or 5 of them come into the region. We located an Urban Outfitters e-commerce facility that's being built right now, Chewy.com and a number of others. So e-commerce is a big trend and continues into 2021 beyond. The other is food and beverage. Pre-pandemic, we all changed the way we ate and ordered food and how it was prepared and how it was delivered and dietary restrictions. That expedited during the pandemic, and we all became familiar with HelloFresh and Blue Apron and other ways to have food delivered to your door. And every restaurant and bar began serving takeout because of the pandemic. So that's really changed the transportation around food. So we're seeing a significant increase in food manufacturing, food distribution, and something I would suggest you keep an eye on. There is a national shortage of cold storage and temperature control space. That is a real opportunity for any economic development group to jump into that area and think about how you get that type of facility in your region or attract the companies that build and operate those. But to your mission infrastructure, from the beginning, SmartPort has been actively engaged in our regional infrastructure discussion in all 4 modes and the ability to have freight mobility. The key to what you're talking about is to make sure you have freight's voice, whether that's railroads, trucking companies, or the actual shippers involved in the conversation because they know how their freight moves and where the bottlenecks are. And again, I applaud you for taking a look at this. There's other regions of the country that have taken a look at it after they had congestion and bottlenecks, and they're very troubled to get out of it. Chicago is a good example. They have the CREATE program to try to understand the rail infrastructure. Michael, I'm sure you're familiar with that. We have stayed ahead of that and dealt with congestion and growth before bottlenecks hit. So infrastructure is critically important to us. We have a new initiative in Kansas City that our Greater Regional Chamber is doing. They call it their Big 5. And this year, 2020, 2021, transportation is part of that. Looking at 2 specific areas. One, job access. How are employees getting to job sites, whether that's public transportation, rideshare programs, bike ped, you name it, to look at how to resolve or assist that movement of people to jobs. The other is freight mobility, making sure that we're paying attention to what you talked about earlier, Chris, the intermodals and the ability to get freight in and out of those intermodals. We're very fortunate that we have 5 intermodal facilities in Kansas City, 2 of which are operating rail infrastructure. The other 3 are industrial parks attached to that. Most notably, the BNSF facility in Kansas is now up to about 13 million square feet of new space built and have a plan to put 6 more million, 7 cranes, significant growth in their intermodal freight capabilities on the BNSF Last thing I'll talk about, you mentioned technology. Technology within the distribution and manufacturing is critical right now as we all face tight labor markets, tight workforce markets. Automation and new technologies to add efficiencies in those facilities are growing to offset the labor needs. So capital investments are going up. And then smart cities and smart infrastructure and roads that talk to vehicles, all of that technology is moving so fast that it's key that you focus on that as you look at your infrastructure growth. And then I'll end with, you mentioned Salt Lake City and things happening in Utah. I was on a call with their team yesterday talking about our project and what their plans are in I think northwestern part of Salt Lake around the UP. And a potential intermodal logistics facility there. So your neighbors are doing what you're doing, and obviously you know the competition, so they're engaged as well. And again, I appreciate the opportunity. I could go on, but I know you've got limited time. Would look forward to the questions that you have after the other two speakers. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Very much appreciate that. Michael, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Just want to make sure. As Chris said, I've spent the last 2 years crisscrossing Nevada, including Clark County, 10 trips there, 3,000 miles. We're up to 550 in-depth conversations with stakeholders. Hello to all the folks attending here that I've met before. Glad to meet the rest of you. I've fallen in love with Nevada and its people. I want to give you as much clarity in the short moments here about what needs to be improved in Nevada's particularly freight transportation system. And I want you to know that there's nothing that I'm saying that we haven't thought out a solution to and how to address. It's the only way I would state clearly what's not working is if that I was prepared to assist in addressing it. Just one slide about our firm. I founded Strategic Rail Finance 26 years ago. I've put all the learning that we've done over this time into the Nevada State Rail Plan. It's a 500-page document, and it has many transformational approaches. Over this 26 years, we've stood up rail infrastructure projects in 44 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Our work is in getting projects done. Even our nonprofit, what I say is we're in the business of getting things done. And the nonprofit On Track North America oversaw all the stakeholder facilitation in the state. And just a note, we're launching the North American Freight Forum next month, which is going to be taking on the most important issues in freight transportation today. Really, Nevada's freight system can't be developed in isolation. There's no rail line that stops at a state line unless it's a river. And there's no supply chain that stops at a state line. And that's one of the points that we emphasized from the beginning, is that we were not going to do a Nevada State Rail Plan only focused on the Nevada footprint. I suspected, well, I knew from our work, extensive work in California, that much of the warehouses in Nevada, particularly the western part of the state, are being filled by trucks, goods coming by truck from California. I suspected, given that California has 13 times the population of Nevada, that it may very well be that those warehouses when the goods are taken out, are being put back into trucks and going back to California. And that is indeed what we're able to pinpoint, so much so that 70% of every truck moving anywhere in the state is in the process of driving to and from California, which means that all of the industrial development that has occurred and that is about to occur without us interceding is going to continue as truck-centric growth. In fact, of all the freight moving in Nevada by truck or by rail, only 4% of it moves by rail to or from a Nevada business. Of 188 warehouses that have been built in Nevada alongside rail lines, only part of one uses rail. So Nevada, while sitting adjacent to the 5th largest economy in the world, with its ports and thereby access to Asia and South America, has a tremendous opportunity if we do the steps that are needed to create the rail service between Nevada and California that is missing. And that may be a surprise to you because you see trains moving through Las Vegas and Clark County. Relative to other main lines, there are few trains, and Southern Nevada does not have intermodal service to and from California. The only service is to Chicago. Why we call this collaborative infrastructure development is because the nature of supply chain and freight-based economic development should call all of us to let go of the idea of competing with our neighboring states. Those states are where our supply chains originate and terminate. If we're not thinking how to collaborate, we can end up like West Virginia auctioning off its $32 million intermodal facility for pennies because the analysis of the whole supply chains wasn't done. You can't just build freight infrastructure and expect that folks are going to show up to use it. So we had a parallel engagement, and I'm going to pull up another document here. We had a parallel engagement to advise Northern Nevada Development Authority on the feasibility of an intermodal or freight facility in the Fernley area. In order to pinpoint where the opportunity lies, we analyzed freight from 14 states east of Nevada and pinpointed 1.4 million truckloads of ag and food commodities that are moving from those states to ports in California that could be diverted to Fernley to be put onto trains to move to Port of Oakland. That type of analysis needs to be done for Southern Nevada. It's not the same set of solutions because you've got an entirely different supply chain moving through Southern Nevada, and that's not exactly stated truthfully. It's not totally different. So the idea of competing really should be let go. You don't want to compete with Utah's inland port. You want to be sitting down with them and your potential port partners and working out what freight would be best intercepted or facilitated in Southern Nevada versus freight that is better facilitated in Salt Lake City. Same with the entire region. So let me move on to give you a little more insight into your county. I'm going to show you 3 of these slides. These are the maps that we developed from focusing in at the same time on whole supply chains, actually getting right down on the ground to what is the existing rail infrastructure and the existing businesses in the state that are using rail and that are not using rail. And it's one of the reasons why we invested our own capital to acquire detailed truck data, not just the free data that's provided by the US DOT, but data that is proprietary and gave us a window into the kind of innovation that we developed for Fernley. What this shows here is that of all of these buildings, and I believe there are about 38, only 7 shippers, truckload shippers, are shipping by rail. Now this, many of you will recognize, is Black Mountain Industrial Center, and we identified it in the rail plan, interacted with DCNR, that this is a tremendous opportunity to focus industrial development efforts to reuse BMIC. And you see here that there's ample rail infrastructure. Only the buildings in black are using rail. I'm going to slide off one more time. This is in the appendix of the new Nevada State Rail Plan. One of the items is the list that we created where we've identified truckload quantity shippers throughout the state that are not using rail, that are pretty close to rail. The first section goes through Henderson, North Las Vegas, and we pinpointed their addresses, phone numbers, websites. Why? Because this is a plan that's meant to be utilized by not just us, but stakeholders throughout the state. These are the kind of tools that we invented to enable the kind of freight-based economic development that you're out to do. Apex Industrial Park has 2 shippers using rail. So you've got your precious land, and I know in some sense there's thinking that there's enormous amounts of land, but really it's all precious. And when you get clear about the facts, like on this slide, and you can see that the only businesses using rail are in black. All the rest are not using rail, and many of them have sidetracks. Again, North Las Vegas, you have pockets of rail activity here and here. All this is getting built as truck-only activity, which again means that the volume of trucks going through I-15 through Las Vegas, Henderson, is steadily increasing. So it's our practice that all logistics-based development, all land use and development should start with logistics analysis of what the opportunities are to be interacting with the supply chains that are originating in your region, terminating in your region, and moving through your region. There are many benefits to this, and here's one that isn't that often thought about. Every time you do economic development that requires roads, you're taking on the maintenance and the construction and the maintenance of those roads, as well as the congestion issues. And railroads pay real estate taxes on their rights of way. Of course, trains move freight on 1/2 to 1/4 the amount of diesel fuel. It also takes, to move the same amount of goods on a 1-mile train, takes a 27-mile convoy of trucks on the road. That's because every rail car requires 3 to 4 trucks to move the same amount of goods. When you add up the length of the trucks and their braking distance, it's 27 miles of space on the road for every 1-mile train that's moving through the region on its own right of way. Additionally, the train moves through in 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and it's gone. There might not be another train for 2 hours. Those 300 to 400 trucks take 2 hours every 30 seconds with another truck going by. So the amount of impact on quality of life is just significant. And we need trucks. We just don't need to keep doing economic development. You know, many of the photos that you see are the tremendous new warehouses throughout the state, rail lines nearby, but they're not connected. So here's just a bit on our approach to economic development, freight-based economic development. We believe that you start with your existing shippers. There's so much attention in economic development field on attracting new businesses. Check in with your existing businesses and you'll find how many of them would expand if they had improved logistics services. How many of them can use direct rail service or transloading service where they can truck to a railhead and then have their goods put on the rail? What other businesses would they like to see located in the region that they can buy from or sell to, so that you can start moving up the value chain, particularly in the mining industry, but in all types of processing. So we do actual shipper savings analysis. How is it per truck, per ton, per whatever appropriate measure to illuminate and present, how does this location going to save or make a new business or existing business additional dollars? Now, when you go to those prospects, first of all, you've identified also the supply chains that can benefit from being in your region. That's a fast track to the businesses that deal in those commodities. And you can go to them with a value proposition. They're going to pay much more attention. They're going to want to build there. They're going to want to build larger. And if it's not already apparent, the shippers don't know these things on their own. It's really important to gain this kind of supply chain knowledge so that you're offering that to folks that are coming to your area. Because if you're doing your outreach and saying to them, we're this close to Port of Long Beach in LA, and you're not aware that Port of LA and Port of Long Beach they don't have capacity for more trains right now. They only have capacity for certain types of trains and certain types of volume. If you're not aware of those kinds of dynamics, you can be spending your time presenting your region as an opportunity, and the actual freight opportunity has not been addressed. So in the Nevada Rail Plan, the words compete and competition are written 8 times. The words collaborate and collaborative are written 50 times. And there's just a lot to be gained by relating with the private sector in a more detailed, getting more information from them, working with advisors and consultants that are committed to doing more than just studies and reports, but are interested in the kind of entity and partnership that can bring this kind of intelligence to your planning and then to the prospects that you're out to engage with. I'll just wrap up by saying, again, this isn't just a bunch of words we put on in a document. We're engaged with Chris and his team to stand up the entity that's going to oversee implementing this thinking. We built a 1.2 million line item database of all the freight moving in by truck and by rail in the state, and have significant relations with California and Utah. And they've embraced fully the idea of collaborating with your neighbor states in order to help them solve problems, address issues that thereby raises Nevada's value and stability. And thanks to all of you, because it's just been you know, a great opportunity for me to lay down the things that I've thought and studied and learned over the last 26 years and apply it to an entire state's economic development and future. And I'm looking forward to continuing that contribution.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Appreciate the information. And I'm mindful of time here. I want to move over to Pierce for his comments.
Got two slides that I want to show towards the end, but talk a little bit about just Moffitt Nickel. We're a Long Beach-based firm, and so we have 75 years of direct experience with the ports of LA and Long Beach. We're a global firm, so there's probably not a seaport in the US that we have not done work for. We have 4 offices in Central and Latin America, as well as Eastern and Northern Europe to do this. Some current projects that might be of interest to this group. We have done the planning, the market analysis, the design, the construction oversight, and then the optimization of the mega rail terminal for the Port of Savannah. And then associated with that, they have constructed 2 inland ports and a third that they're undergoing a siting analysis for. In Southern California, we're working on the hard design of Pier B, which is a major piece of rail infrastructure serving the port complex there, as well as we recently completed a major terminal automation program there. And that automation is a very difficult subject I don't want to get into, but it will play into how the Southern California ports deal with their congestion factors. Some other work underway includes on the Gulf Coast, the Port of Mobile and their intermodal facility and their relationship with Canadian National. And then in Virginia, the Central Rail Yard, which again is optimizing. They have, and the railroads do compete with each other, right? Michael will tell you this. They might spend $1 to collaborate and $2 to compete there. And so finding ways to get the railroads to share infrastructure is very difficult. So we're working on the Central Rail Yard in Virginia, which is really oriented towards one Class 1 railroad, whereas in Savannah, they have managed to get collaboration between Norfolk Southern and CSX there. And so that's a unique set of circumstances here. Going back a little bit in time on my own experience here in Virginia, we were lucky the Secretariat had underneath it, you know, all the modal agencies. So when I worked for Governor Kane and Governor Warner, I had the highway agency, the rail agency, the aviation agencies, the seaports, and we had an integrated capital program that allowed us to focus on really some of our economic assets. And so those became crystal clear. We really had 3 pillars of the economy in Virginia. One was obviously the Port of Virginia. A second was Dulles International Airport. And then the third was the Department of Defense. So we had the Pentagon at the north, and then we had the largest naval facility down in Norfolk and a number of other facilities in between. And I will say that the military is a big user of rail resources and transportation resources and should not be overlooked, their potential impact on overall economic development. An interesting project that we did back then that may have some relevance to what you all are looking at was the Heartland Corridor. And while there are others, this was a three-state partnership. And Michael made reference to it, the one of the inland facilities in West Virginia, but we went, it was the ability to get double stack container service from the Port of Virginia down in the Norfolk area, all the way up through West Virginia, a little bit through Maryland, and into the Ohio Valley area. And so every state had a piece of this. And one of the reasons there were like the West Virginia intermodal facilities, they really wanted it. Norfolk Southern was willing to put some money towards that. It happened, and it did not work as it was originally intended. And I think that's a cautionary tale here. But that facility now, you have double track, double stack that is allowed for the free movement of both imports and exports on that. It's been very beneficial to several states, not just the Port of Virginia, as well as several industries on there. So what I'm going to show two slides real quick here to help think through this a little bit. One of the things, though, that we set up, and one of my pitches to you guys is to think about a funding mechanism. We created something back in, would have been 2004, 2005, called the Rail Enhancement Fund. And Virginia at that time, and still is, very committed to public-private partnerships and the ability to interact with private investors, private entities, and have negotiated procurement, which is far more difficult than it sounds like. But it's been a very successful program that we established back then, continuing through several governors, Republican and Democrat, very successful today. The Rail Enhancement Fund was one leg of that. That was how the Heartland Corridor was funded. But it also allowed it for a number of other both passenger and freight rail initiatives. And something, again, that may be a good lesson here is where those investments occurred was not necessarily where the action was from the public sector. So if we're able to do several miles of siding in the Shenandoah Valley, for example, that freed up capacity for passenger rail service from Northern Virginia down to the Lynchburg area. Or as we were looking to increase our freight movements out of the port and up to the Northeast, we, the state of Virginia, actually invested in a tunnel in the District of Columbia, the Virginia Avenue Tunnel. Project was just completed a couple years ago, but it allowed double stack freight to move back and forth to the north and south. There's a theme here, which is, between Heartland Corridor and the Virginia Avenue Tunnel, the railroads think, as you heard from your previous speaker, they don't necessarily respect jurisdictional lines. In fact, they rarely respect those jurisdictional lines. And your investments are in the network and not necessarily where you're looking to have, whether it's an intermodal facility or an economic development alternative. So let me just share two slides with you all very quick to see if I can get to this here. Okay. So I want to do both of these slides. See if I can get that full screen. And the purpose of this is to show where are rail intermodal facilities in the US. And obviously they're much denser in the East, and there's a lot of history and reason for that you can imagine. The blue dots are where you have a seaport related intermodal facility. And what you can see is there's not a lot, okay? And so the other thing is there are a whole lot of rail facilities, and I will share with you, because there is a keen interest in what an intermodal facility can do. And I go back to, some of the places that I'm sure you all have looked at where there's just been a great nexus of freight here. And in some cases, though, they haven't done their homework. And so there is fallow investment in those places, in some of those facilities, and public dollars. So you want to be careful and do your homework. And it sounds like you guys are investing a lot of time in that. So that's a good point. The second point that I'd like to make here is that there are different kinds of freight complexes, and they're not necessarily gonna follow the same path. And so if you look at major clusters of freight, obviously you're gonna have Southern California, you're gonna have New York, the Savannah, complex, which really encompasses both South Carolina and Georgia, the freight complex there. Those are kind of the corners of intermodal economic development in the US. But when you peel back and look at jobs and employment, the two areas that jump out are the Dallas Metroplex. Most people don't think of Dallas as a major freight or transloading center. Well, it is. And so, at the heart of that is Alliance, Texas, which did not start out as rail-based economic development. It started as pure development and then industrial and technology and flex, and it really grew into its very significant rail contribution over time. A second complex that doesn't always pop up on the radar screen is Atlanta. Atlanta after Dallas, and really and only slightly by New York and Southern California in terms of these freight-related jobs. Atlanta has this huge, very thriving, freight economy. It's not based on a single intermodal facility, but it is based on very good access, very strong, robust market growth, very smart public sector investments. And they're now in the process of trying to find out, okay, how can we further capitalize on this? Well, they've got, the Port of Savannah that has now done this mega rail facility and complementing an existing very robust freight-based economy in Atlanta now with two that are built, intermodal facilities, and a third there. So it really is, I guess my point is, and I think Michael would agree with this, don't necessarily lock in on something that what you want. Look at examples. A lot of times what started out as an economic development initiative grew into a rail-based, and they don't necessarily follow, in a logical order. So second slide I want to share with you is if you look at the fastest growing US ports and compare it to real estate markets here, there's some interesting information here. Now, Wilmington, Mobile and Jacksonville are relatively small import and export seaports, but they're growing fast. And, Mobile's done pretty well with Airbus and Amazon. Jacksonville really starting to take off. But look at the two big areas of Houston and Savannah right there in the middle. And, to have that percentage growth on a very large seaport is really stunning. And really, some of that, it's not just related to COVID and the pandemic growth. I mean, this is, some of this is old data. If you looked at this today, these would be even bigger numbers and very robust. Same time, if you look at the industrial real estate market, who's at the top, Savannah and Houston. Charleston, which is really part of that, Savannah, Charleston complex. Miami, which is just a very strong consumer market. It's also a distribution for north-south trade, whether airborne or in some cases rail. And then Seattle. And one of the reasons for that is how much they serve the state of Alaska with materials, goods, and products that come out of the Seattle complex and occasional exports coming out of Alaska back. So I just wanted to share those examples on this. What I would like to share, Chris, is our willingness to stick with you guys as you ask these questions. Like Michael, we're there in Long Beach on this and happy to share our experience. Cautionary note, there have been bad investments in some of these areas. That's one of the reasons I put that pin map up there. And then lastly, just understanding the different interests of a railroad versus a seaport versus its owner, which might be a municipal entity. These are very complex relationships. I mentioned automation earlier. As you guys know, there's huge congestion in Southern California ports. They're dramatically trying to undo that. You can't do that overnight. So there's a lot of work to be done here, but also a lot of opportunity, and we're happy to help and answer any questions.
Thank you, Pierce. I appreciate that. And Michael and Chris, I think there's a lot for us to chew on there, and certainly I'm full of questions, and I think most of the working group probably is as well. One thing I should point out, though, is we are coming up on time. So I think we may have a couple of options here. Certainly, we can invite our speakers back purely for a Q&A in a future meeting. If the working group is amenable, we can spend a few minutes here going over a few questions and then subsequently work through the remaining parts of the agenda fairly quickly. So if anybody's got any, perhaps a direct question of the speakers here, I think we'll probably have a few minutes to entertain two, but we want to keep them relatively brief. Okay, great. So Pierce and Michael and Chris, again, thank you. Appreciate the perspective and information, and look forward to working with you in the future. So moving on to item number 8, introduction of agenda items scheduled for April. For that meeting, one of the things that we are thinking in terms of the progression of the conversation here, and I will say that we will have time set aside for a review of the previous 2 meetings, as well as the takeaways, and provide time for working group members to bring perspective into the items that were discussed in this meeting and our first meeting last month. We will have a focus on technology in terms of a panel discussion. And that will be, I think, focused on kind of the intersection of infrastructure development and technology, looking at autonomy, electrification, and sort of the backbone requirements that will need to be built into future infrastructure to facilitate the growth and adoption of the types of technologies that Nevada's been active in testing over the years, and how we can look at those technologies as potential areas where we can add value to industry and potentially spur economic growth by taking a much more concerted effort in linking those to infrastructure development. So happy to if there's any comments or thoughts on that from the group. Okay, seeing none, we will move on to public comment. And again, anybody wishing to offer public comment, please provide very clearly your first and last name. You'll have 2 minutes per comment. Jeanette, I'll turn the floor to you.
Absolutely. This is Jeanette Holgan for the record. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? You will be limited to 2 minutes. Okay, there are none. And so Chris, no public comment at this time, but I just wanted to quickly note for the record that I do have Kristen Aviard, Constance Brooks, and Ryan Smith present for this meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, great. Well, thank you. And this concludes our meeting. I appreciate again all of your time and our speakers for providing some additional perspective. We'll see you next month. Thanks again.